Muslims in this part come to Christians all the time telling Christians that the Bible's been changed.
Right.
They don't know Greek. They've not studied Greek.
Okay.
They don't know Hebrew, and they've not studied Hebrew.
Yeah.
And yet and yet Muslims all the time come to Christians telling us about what our Bible teaches us.
Right.
So I'm glad that you've now condemned the behaviour of 99% of all the Dawagandists in this part.
Well, I don't know if that's 99%.
Right. But let me go forward. Because Muslims come to Christians claiming that the Bible has been changed. They never show any evidence. They never present any argument. I've come to you and I've said that your Qur'an has been changed. I have shown to the effect that it has been changed archaeological evidence of... You might not have been here for that bit. I can always repeat it for you. I have shown archaeological evidence that your Qur'an has been changed. I have shown sources in your hadiths that you don't dispute are saying that there was a verse in the Qur'an that is no longer there in the Qur'an. And I have also shown to you that there are different Qur'ans being recited today. I'll just go over that last point again because you probably missed it the first time. Right. So for example, the verse that I read to you where it says, never do we abrogate any sign nor cause it to be forgotten, unless we bring one better than it or similar to it, which means that you should be able to show me a verse that is better or similar to the one that was abrogated. I want to see that verse. But there is actually a textual variant amongst your Qur'ans today about how that verse is written. In one variant given by Ibn Kathir and Abu Amr, it reads, rather than saying cause it to be forgotten, it says in addition, it says, nor postpone it unless we. So there's additional words in one version of your Qur'an over this one.
Nor postpone it, what?
So, look, I'm reading from Fadl Solomon Bridges' translation of the Qur'an.
Yeah.
Right, Fadl Solomon, it's a Muslim production.
Yes,
Muslims made this, right? And they know textual variants between existing Qur'ans today in the very verse that I've used. So when it comes to abrogated, never do we abrogate. In some versions of the Qur'an, such as that by Ibn Amir, it reads, never do we command the abrogation.
Okay.
So you've got textual variants in your Qur'ans existing today. You've got textual, you've got textual variants in your Qur'an today versus your most ancient Qur'ans. That's the archaeological evidence. And you've got your hadith saying that your Qur'an at the time of Muhammad is not the Qur'an that you have today.
Ibn Kathir lived in the 14th century within an Islamic intellectual world that was far more open to the diversity of Quranic readings than the modern dawah environment we see today. In his time, variations in the qirā'āt, whether in wording, structure, or meaning, were understood as a natural part of the tradition. And so, when he wrote Tafsir al-Qur'an al-Azam, he recorded these differences with complete calmness, never treating them as a threat to the sanctity of the text. For Ibn Kathir, the fact that a verse could be read with different sounds and produce different nuances was not a problem. It was part of the Quranic sciences themselves. Throughout his commentary, Ibn Kathir frequently mentions alternative readings transmitted by the Qur'an, explaining how changes in a single vowel or letter could produce distinct meanings. He did not view this as a theological dilemma, because the diversity of qirā'āt had long been understood and accepted in classical Islam. In other words, the plurality of readings was considered a legitimate part of how the revelation was preserved and transmitted, not something that needed to be forced into uniformity. This stands in sharp contrast to modern Muslim rhetoric, which often insists that the Qur'an is identical everywhere, letter for letter. Such claims do not align with the writings of classical scholars like Ibn Kathir, Al-Tabari, Al-Qurtubi, or Ibn Mujahid, the very figure who canonized the 7 qirā'āt. These scholars openly documented textual variants, showing clearly that absolute uniformity was never a foundational concept in the early tradition. The shift is driven more by social context than theology. The modern world demands textual uniformity and absolute certainty, especially as Islam engages with Western criticism, academic scrutiny, and a digital culture that expects visible proof. This pressure has produced new apologetic slogans, such as one Qur'an with no variations, even though such slogans do not match the manuscript history or the classical commentaries.
So let me get this right. So the textual variance that we're talking about is abrogation, right? That's what I said from the beginning, is that the verses have been abrogated. And now, when I say to you that a hadith scholar has said something, you're not taking it, but when Ibn Kathir does a tafsir or something. You read me two different parts there. One was about.
So when I quote Ibn Kathir, right? I'm quoting Ibn Kathir because he records textual variants of the Quran, and I'm presenting that as evidence. Let me finish. He's reporting textual readings of the Quran, and I'm using that as evidence to the claim that the Quran has been changed. When I quote hadith, I'm quoting it because it's evidence that the Quran has been changed. When I quote academic studies of comparisons between your modern 1924 version of the Quran and your ancient text of the Quran, I'm quoting it as evidence that the Quran has been changed. The reason why I would accept your scholarly opinion if you could show me the hadith that he's basing it on. But the point is, you haven't provided a hadith. You've just given me an opinion of a scholar. But opinions of scholars are like belly buttons. Everybody's got one. But a scholar's opinions that isn't based on evidence is not worth diddly squat. It's no better than yours or mine.
No, in Islamic tradition, it is worth something because
even though it's got no evidence backing it up.
The same way that you're using it to interpret the Quran in its non-primary language, how you're using tafsir, for you that holds weight. I've given you two hadith scholars which arrived at the same conclusion, that it was one was abrogated by speech and that it was done.
And neither of them gave you any evidence. Neither of them gave you any evidence for their claims.
What's the evidence that the Arabic text was incorrect in those
right.
Qur'an?
So firstly, I never made any mention about whether it was correct or incorrect. I never even discussed that. Yeah. What I said was is that Muslims claim that the Quran has never been changed, and that there's only one Quran, and yet they are saying that in the face of all the evidence that contradicts them. You have quoted two scholars who both said the same opinion, but you never quoted any evidence to their opinion. If I came up to you with the opinion about X, Y, or Z, quite rightly you would say, where's your evidence?
Well, no, if you...
So I'm claiming that the Quran has been changed. I'm providing evidence.
That's not evidence. You're using a scholarly interpretation.
Right.
The same way I use a scholarly interpretation.
Right, so this evidence is threefold, remember? Right, what are my three strands of evidence? Do you remember?
Well, you said about the two different parts of the verse.
Right, so my first strand of evidence is from Fedel Soliman's Bridget translation of the Quran, which notes itself different readings of the qirā'āt. Okay, so
can you send me that?
Yeah, of course. You can find it on Quran.com, which is an Islamic website.
Yeah.
Fadl Soliman is produced by Muslims. It's not some Christian missionary invention.
What's the first number?
We're looking at Surah 2, verse 106. And Fadl Soliman has noted differences in qirā'āt. Okay? My second strand of evidence was archaeological, which was someone took the 1924 version of the Quran and compared it to your most ancient copies of the Quran and found... Don't allow him to interrupt. This is just rude behavior.
You did it last week, yeah?
Hey, if you want to join this conversation, Sam, listen.
No,
Sam,
dictate me.
If you
No
would like,
dictate me.
if you would like to have a conversation,
No dictate me.
I'm saying,
No dictate me. No dictate me. No dictate me.
He's just trying to disrupt.
You can dictate me.
You're
You
just
can
losing
dictate
the
me. You
debate,
can
Sam.
dictate me.
You're just
You
losing
can
the debate.
losing debate.
This is what happens when you come out of your home without your medicine.
You can dictate me.
You've got to take your pills in the morning, bro.
No,
Seriously.
that's what you do. That's why you're fat. That's your fat. No.
He's asking you to go away.
I don't care.
Right. So
In the study of Quranic textual history, one of the most significant pieces of evidence comes from comparing the modern Standard Edition, the 1924 Cairo Edition, with the earliest Quranic manuscripts uncovered through archaeological research. The 1924 edition was produced by an Al-Azhar committee that standardized a single qirā'ah, Hafs and Asim, and fixed one official orthography. Its purpose was not to reproduce the earliest historical text, but to create a uniform reading for the modern Muslim world. For that reason, the 1924 edition is not a critical edition. It is a normative one. When scholars compared this edition with early manuscripts, they focused on the oldest textual witnesses available to us. Among the most important is the Sana manuscript from the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Hijri calendar, which contains a lower text, a palimpsest, and an upper text that often differ from each other. Alongside it, the Topkapi and Samarkand codices, though slightly later, remain key representatives of the early Razm tradition. Numerous Hijazi fragments preserved in European libraries also reveal the earliest stages of Quranic writing, before the introduction of dots, vowels, and standardized orthographic rules. When these manuscripts were systematically compared with the 1924 Cairo edition, researchers identified roughly 98 textual variations. These differences are not trivial spelling discrepancies. They involve missing or added words, alternative word choices, rearranged phrases, and early rasm forms that allow more than one interpretation. Because the earliest manuscripts lacked dots and vowel markings, a single consonantal skeleton could generate multiple readings, and the manuscripts themselves preserve different choices. From a historiographical perspective, these findings show that the Quranic text underwent a long process of stabilization before reaching a standardized form. The 1924 Cairo edition represents just one moment in that process, a modern effort to unify recitation, not a perfect reproduction of the first-century codices. This means that the modern Qur'an is not an identical duplicate of the earliest text. It reflects editorial decisions formally endorsed by religious authorities.